So someone was messaging me asking, how can I become a millionaire? And this is a question which I want to address because I don't think you really want to become a millionaire. I think actually it's about the freedom and the safety and security that you think money will give you. And by the way, at the end, somewhere towards the end, I'm going to tie this back to like the spiritual meaning and why kind of important, but also not really important. So you don't really want money if you want to become a millionaire. Usually you want freedom and safety. Well, the truth is we're already free and safety isn't real. It won't really give you either of those things. It's really just the illusion of those things. And usually the illusion comes in the form of like a big house, which you think is somehow more safety, and the illusion of freedom, which is something we already have. We're already born free and we stay free until after we die. So then the next argument after that kind of debunked that, but then after that it would be like, well, I need money to do things. The truth is that's not even the case. Like you don't need money to do most of the things that you want to do. 95% of the things that you want to do, you can already do. And this is something that I realized, I've spoken to millionaires, I've had friends who coach millionaires, and often you find that the more money they have, they actually find all these different problems and stresses. And usually, not always, but usually they actually end up having less time and less kind of energy and space in their life to do the things that they wanted to do in the first place. So this idea of like it will give you freedom, that's not always the case. It can be the case, and certainly money can make things easier. But past a certain point, I think they did a study on this. It's like past about $30,000 to $40,000 a year. But when you get past that level of income, it doesn't make much difference, if any difference, to your happiness and enjoyment of life, because most of the things you want to do, you can already do. A classic example is, people say, I need to become a millionaire so I can travel. Well, that's not even the case either, because you can travel pretty much for free. There are different ways that you can do this. You can do like volunteer work, you can do sponsored stuff where you do some social media work in exchange for free accommodation. You can do very cheap travel, so you could use your savings. If you have like even a small amount of savings, you could go to Southeast Asia, you could go to like Philippines, Indonesia, like all kinds of South America, these places where life is actually incredibly cheap, and you could live on $200, $300 a month, maybe even less in some places, right? And that's an amount that most people could actually save up. And even with, let's say, a minimum wage job, it wouldn't take you that long to save $300, and that's like a month's worth of travel in Southeast Asia and places like that. Now, of course, that's not for everyone. Difficult to save money. You've got expenses and things. That's fine. But there are opportunities where you don't need any money. Literally, like you can just apply and then show up. They'll pay you accommodation. They'll pay, some cases even give you food in exchange for like 1 or 2 hours work a day in some places. So then really the only thing left is that, okay, you need money to buy, let's say, luxury goods, which is, I always see this. I see people who become millionaires, especially people who become millionaires really quickly. They just go out and buy loads of luxury brands like Gucci, like all these expensive watches, luxury bags, colognes, cars and stuff. And it's like, those things inherently aren't any better than other stuff. They're more expensive, but they're often pretty much the same quality. If anything, it's just a waste of money and time, because you're just literally buying the logo essentially to show other people that, hey, look at me, I have loads of money and I can afford to buy this logo. But no one actually cares. That's the funny thing. No one actually really cares that this person bought, this supercar versus this person buying. You might stop in the street and say, oh, quite a nice car, looks cool, but no one actually cares. Like, that doesn't increase your value as a human in any way whatsoever. It just means that you've essentially wasted a large chunk of money on a car which does exactly the same thing as every other car. And that's the other funny thing. Let's say if you spend $500,000 on a supercar versus spending $500 on a really crappy car. Okay. Now, yeah, of course you'd rather drive the supercar, but in reality, the supercar can never get out of first gear in most countries in the world. So you have to stick to the same speed limits, drive on the same roads, and you don't get to the destination any faster. Now, of course, it's just about how much you enjoy it. I get that. And if you have loads of money, then of course, and you'd rather drive a supercar, then that's fine. But you don't need that to be happy. And in many cases, that actually doesn't make you happier. Once you've bought the thing, the luxury, a watch, car, the big house, the thrill wears off pretty quickly. And what you're left with is the person you were before all the money, which, you might be happy, you might not. And if you're not, then that's a problem, because you can't buy it. Like, no matter what things you buy, your happiness will kind of stay the same. So what's the answer? And of course, you're probably listening thinking, well, yeah, okay, but I still want to be a millionaire. We all kind of do, right? It would be nice. But that shouldn't be the focus. Because if you focus on the money, then what happens is, like many millionaires, you'll end up having millions of dollars, but you've sacrificed your health, your time, and you're not actually any happier, because the things that made you happy, or the things that would make you happy, you've been neglecting just to chase the money. And like, who knows what will happen? You could lose the money in a bad investment. You could like trip and die next week. And if you haven't been actually enjoying it and, being happy on the journey towards getting the money, it's pointless. It's kind of a waste of time. So I always say this, and, in my community and stuff, like in my course, I teach you how to make money doing what you love. But the key, from the beginning, the very the very first focus is that you've got to find a way to be happy now, even with nothing, or even with not the result you want. Because if you do that, then as soon as you start to get the money, which you will, you'll be happy in all areas. You won't have any kind of gaps in your life. You won't be sitting there in your mansion wishing that you were happy, or searching for something to buy. And you see this quite a lot with like compulsive shoppers. They will just constantly be buying stuff every day, every week. They'll just be trying to search for happiness in possessions. And of course, it never comes. And so the only thing that they're left with is, okay, I have to buy all these possessions, spend all this money, and then show other people that I'm spending this money. And then hopefully that will give me some kind of validation. And then maybe people will like me and maybe I'll be happy. But it doesn't work like that. No one actually cares. And if anything, when people see somebody spending loads and loads of money on just stuff that is pointless, like a waste of time and money, it's just silly. It's just funny almost. It's like, what are you doing? You could be experiencing life and then there you are just, buying luxury brands every day, millions of pairs of shoes, or like, it's pointless. One of my mentors and friends was actually reminding me, quite recently that money is literally just a number. And we tend to forget this. It's kind of a made up number on a screen that doesn't actually exist in the real world. It's just a digital, like pixels on a screen. It shouldn't have any bearing on how happy you are. Now, of course, you need money to buy food, pay bills. I get that. But beyond the point where you have that money to pay the bills and buy the food, having 10 times more money doesn't make you 10 times happier. It might make you a little bit happier and it depends how you define happiness, but you might kind of trick your senses to think and feel that you're happier because you're in a nicer bed or you're driving a nicer car. But that's not actually lasting joy and happiness. That's just kind of pleasure. And there's a very big difference between happiness and pleasure. They're not the same thing. Pleasure is where you stimulate your senses with something and it feels good. In the moment, it feels nice. So pleasure would be something like you sit down on a Friday and instead of doing anything, you just binge eat a Domino's pizza or really greasy like fast food, and you binge watch some movies. Okay, nice. Pleasurable. Okay, it's nice, it's pleasurable. But that's not happiness. Because the day after, you probably won't feel pleasurable. You'll be looking for the next thing. And this is also quite often the case with people who make a lot of money, especially very quickly, is that they think pleasure equals happiness. So they'll be constantly trying to stimulate their senses to become pleasured, right? So they'll be like buying loads of fast food, which is really bad for your body. They'll be buying loads of luxury brands and flashy things to try and stimulate their senses, to trick themselves into thinking that they're happy. But it's not actually happiness, it's just pleasure. Pleasure is always temporary. But if you build happiness, and happiness is something which is quite tricky, right? Because it doesn't just come from the senses, it comes from an inner fulfillment and an inner peace and an inner joy, which would still be there if you had nothing. And this is really what I think a lot of people don't understand. Happiness is not built by buying things. Happiness is created by being someone, by actually, being a certain person and feeling a certain way. You can't buy that. There's no amount of possessions you can buy that will actually lead to happiness. All they have is tricking themselves into thinking they're happy by buying pleasure. Anyway, so how does this tie back into spirituality? Well, basically, if you think that you need money to escape the matrix, you're kind of right to a certain degree. You do need a certain amount of this made up money, this made up number on a screen to be able to unlock certain doors and do certain things. Okay, but it's not anywhere near as much as you think it is. Really, it's actually more about where the income comes from that is important. So let's say you have a job and you're earning 2K a month. Okay, it's far from being a millionaire, right? But you're earning 2K a month and you have to be in an office 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. That is slavery, do you see? Because you can't leave your office and you can't leave your country. You have to do that job in that office for those hours to get the 2K. Now, imagine now that another person is earning 2K passively. And they don't have to go to a job, they don't have to work in an office, and they can decide when they work, or they can decide not to work at all. Now, can you see that person earning 2K passively is completely free, whereas the person earning 2K actively is trapped and tied to a location? Now, this is the interesting thing about millionaires. If you do it right, it's more freedom and more pleasure, right? Not happiness, but more pleasure. You have more opportunities. But if you do it wrong, and this is very often the case, you could end up becoming a millionaire, but you have no time. And I see this quite often where people will build like a company, they'll get a bunch of employees, offices, and they'll be doing all these things and think like, wow, yeah, I'm really making it. This is great. Buy the luxury brands, all this stuff. But then hold on a second, you have no free time. You can't step out of the office. You have to be doing that role. Now, of course, you can outsource stuff. You can hire people to do the job you were doing as a CEO, let's say. But it still occupies space in your brain, and it's still, 90% of the time, you still have to do stuff. You still have to physically go into the office to manage the team, to have meetings with the managers, to decide the direction of the company, to deal with problems, to deal with paperwork and legal issues and accounting. Like you don't have free time. So imagine if you're earning $50,000 a day, or imagine you're earning like, I don't know, $10 or $20 million a month, but you have no free time. Or let's say you have some free time. Let's say you work 30 hours a week, not even full time, right? 30 hours, pretty good, right? 20 million a month, 30 hours a month. 30 hours a week. It's not bad. Most people would take that trade. But personally, me, I would rather earn 2K a month and not have to work any hours, because now I'm completely free. I can spend my time however I want to. I'm completely flexible. And this is another thing about building a location independent business. By building it so that you don't need to work somewhere physically, if one country gets weird, I think you know what I mean by that with everything that's going on in the last few years. If one country gets creepy or like weird, you can just pack up your laptop and leave. You can just go to somewhere else. And your whole business comes with you. Or let's say if there's a blackout or an internet cutout or something like that, it doesn't matter because the income is passive. So you'll continue getting the income even if nothing is on. Like your entire house could burn down, and as long as you survive the fire, obviously you'll be fine. You can just move to another house. You can just hop over to another country, buy a new laptop and continue counting the money. I mean, this is the benefits of building something location independent. You're not tied to a job, a country, an office, a boss, or anything. You can just move around, be free, have all of your time. Now, in my opinion, that brings us one step closer to happiness. So 2K a month passively versus 2K or even 20 million a month actively. Personally, I'd rather have the 2K a month passive because you have all your time. And by having all of your free time and being flexible and free to move around, that leads us one step closer to happiness, because now you can spend your time doing the things that really matter. You can spend your time with loved ones, experiencing life, going on adventures, growing, learning, healing, giving yourself the space to exercise properly, go out into nature, prepare or, buy nice foods, healthy food. These things will really lead to happiness. But just buying stuff like luxury brands while working 30 or 40 hours a month or a week and trying to show off the fact that you're doing this to get some kind of validation, it's pointless. So that should never be the goal. The goal should be freedom and happiness. So most decisions people make do not lead to those things. They lead to either more slavery, being trapped, or in some cases, pleasure, which is not happiness. It's just temporary happiness.